Valorant Episode 3 Act 2 is making a pretty big splash with its new map Fracture being added to the game. But there are also some awesome agent changes that are coming to the patch that are going to shake up the meta a little bit. Today we're going to be factoring in all of the new agent changes and telling you exactly how we expect them to switch up the meta just a little bit so that you can know exactly what the best agents in the game are right now with all of the factors included. Obviously, Fracture is going to be one of those factors, but it's not going to be the main thing that influences this tier list, as we still have 6 other maps to worry about, but that's okay, just stick with us as we get into it today. Oh, and by the way, if you agree or disagree with any of our agent placements, be sure to let us know in the comments below, as we'd love to hear your opinions on how the agents are currently ranked. Starting out with our C tier actually, and if you'll notice there's actually no D tier this time, this means that every agent in the D tier has moved up at least slightly, and this is exciting. Brimstone unfortunately is going to be taking our spot as the lowest rated agent in the game, although he is seeing buffs this patch making it so his ultimate can destroy things like Cypher tripwires, Killjoy setups, and Sage walls. In most situations, this likely isn't going to make too big of a deal, and because of this we moved him up one tier, but he's still more or less not going to be too amazing. That being said, he does have a lot of potential for retakes on the new map Fracture, seeing as a lot of the sites are sort of enclosed, meaning that it may cause players at times to hunker down on site for post-plant, leaving a massive opportunity for his ultimate to be a strong force. However, just this one map being added doesn't really change the fact that Brimstone is pretty much unplayable on maps like Icebox and Breeze, and it also doesn't change the fact that his 3 smokes with no refresh can oftentimes make him feel just a little bit behind the competition. This is why you'll find Brimstone at the bottom of the C tier today, but hey, maybe as the patch plays out, we'll see him move up a bit more. Although Brimstone did apparently have the highest win rate for this patch according to Blitz.gg, so maybe there is something to be said for his simplicity. Win rate isn't everything, however, but we'll keep an eye on him. Maybe he's a lot stronger than we realize, at least in competitive. The next agent that we'll be taking a look at though is Yoru. Yoru finds himself right above Brimstone in his current state, and this probably comes as no surprise to anyone. Yoru didn't receive any buffs this patch, and although there is a confirmed rework on the way is not now, and right now Yoru has potential, but for the average player is just not that good. In matchmaking, Yoru has an absolutely terrible win rate, and in pro play, he's hardly ever seen. Until Yoru's rework, I really don't think that we'll be seeing him too much, but it is nice to know that there is something on the horizon for him. Before we move on to the rest of the agents, by the way, we're currently adding a bunch of new content to the website to help you learn how to play these agents who may be in the meta, so if you'd like to check that out, be sure to head down to the description and click that link. But with that being said, let's get into the B tier. Our first agent making his way into the B tier is Breach. Breach this patch is seeing a change that is pretty similar to Brimstone's, now with his Aftershock going to be able to have the ability to destroy Cypher tripwires, Killjoy setups, and Sage walls. But the thing that was added that is an even bigger deal is now his Aftershock can actually destroy Killjoy's lockdown ability, which sounds like an absolute nightmare for any Killjoy mains out there. And I always said that one of the most frustrating parts of playing Killjoy is that you can place your ultimate and it can be destroyed by pretty much everything in the game, and now there's just one more thing to worry about. Now, of course, this one change isn't going to make Breach the best agent in the game. However, on Fracture, a map that is centered around taking space, something that Breach is very good at, we could see him having some sort of potential on this map. The rough part is that the main competition right now is Skye and Sova, so he probably still won't be meta, but this is definitely a nice change for him that may result in him seeing just a little bit more play on Killjoy's main maps like Ascent. As a Breach fan myself, I'll probably try picking him up just a bit more in the next few weeks and see how the changes feel for him. As far as his win rate goes, he has a pretty low win rate, but you may expect to see it rise up slightly over the next few weeks, and as far for pro play, I really wouldn't expect it to change much. Like we said, his competition is still Sova and Skye, and even KO now. So you may see him picked as like a niche counter to teams that run Killjoy, but it probably won't affect much. Speaking of which, that brings us to our next agent, KO. KO's pro play has risen slightly, with teams like 100 Thieves running him a bit in the recent tournaments, and we've started to see a bit of his potential. KO definitely isn't trash, but he's still not seeing the amount of matchmaking play we'd expect from him, and with the 3rd lowest win rate in the game for last act, KO isn't quite impressing us as much as we really hope so. But after seeing a bunch of really awesome pop flashes you could perform, KO may be an agent that is a bit slept on. That being said, players would need to put in the time to learn these pop flashes, and I don't really expect that to ever happen. If you do, maybe you'll find KO as an S tier agent, but as for us right now, he seems pretty C tier still. No changes to KO this patch, but maybe as time goes on, he'll receive a slight buff. Next in line for the B tier though is Phoenix. Once again, no changes to our flash agents this patch. Seems Riot thinks they're in a pretty good place, or they'll handle that later. But Phoenix is pretty familiar to the lower ranks of this tier list. He's a really solid support style of duelist and has a very versatile kit, but he's really just not the star fragger that you see in agents like Jett, Raze, or Reyna. Teams like Sentinels do run Phoenix in some of their team comps in pro play, but his pick rate is nowhere near as high as the other duelist, and his win rate in matchmaking is still below 50%. Oh, and by the way, it seems like some of you sort of need a lesson on how the win rate works for these statistics, so here it is. So if you take an agent like Jett, for example, who has a 50.2% win rate, what this means is that she wins 50.2% of the games that she was the only Jett in the game. Because obviously Jett can be picked on each team, right? So if Jett is picked on each team, this would mean that they would cancel each other out because one win and one loss comes out to 50% win rate. So this means that in the games where there is only one Jett, she wins 50.2% of the matches. We get a lot of comments where players are like, Jett's win rate is 50% because she's picked in every match, which actually could be true if she had a pick rate of 100%. But she doesn't. She has a pick rate of 15%, which is high, but this means that there's absolutely games where there's only one Jett in them, and in those games, she wins 50.2% of the time. And that might seem low to you, but from there we can start to draw conclusions of why Jett might have such a low win rate. Maybe it's because people think she's strong and decide to play her when they don't know how to play her, or maybe it's because people are running Jett in team comps where they really shouldn't be. Or maybe it's because Jett isn't as good as we think she is. That's also entirely possible. There's a lot of reasons for why this might be, and I hope this gives you a better insight on how these statistics work. Moving on to our next agent in the B tier though, actually going to be another duelist, Reyna finds herself at the top of the B tier. She can be a super strong carry in matchmaking, there's no doubt about that. Her dismiss is awesome, and I too really enjoy playing Reyna at times. But as always, she doesn't offer very much in terms of team utility, and for that reason, she finds herself a little bit lower. In terms of matchmaking, her win rate is pretty decent, nothing too crazy, but she is still for sure a decent pick. And in terms of pro play, there are select players who pick her quite a bit, but for the most part, she's not nearly as much of a must pick as agents like Raze or Jett. And for that reason, we place her just a little bit lower. You can sub out a Reyna for pretty much any duelist and still be okay, oftentimes better. The only exception I'd say to this is Icebox, as Reyna is still very strong at Icebox due to her ability to abuse off angles on the map. Moving on to our A tier, a bit of a crowded tier this time, we're finding that Killjoy is starting off the list. Killjoy, as we mentioned already, is receiving a few nerfs in this patch, and first of all being the ones that we mentioned where her util is now able to be broken by things such as Breach Aftershock, Brimstone Ultimate, and Sova Ult. But also, what we haven't mentioned is that her turret's slow of enemies movement speed is going to be reduced down from 72.5% down to 29.5%. And this is quite a big difference in slow speed, and it should change some things. However, the biggest strength of her turret is being able to peek off of it and create crossfires with it. So although the tagging speed may make it slightly harder to trade off of it, it still probably won't affect much in the way that you play around it. The most annoying thing is going to be your utility getting destroyed by just random abilities now, and you'll have to factor in all of those things. Overall though, last act Killjoy's win rate was pretty decent, and this act we expect it to remain around the same. As for pro play, she still sees a good amount of pro play, and as we mentioned, maybe if you start to see Breach as some sort of counter pick to Killjoy, that could change, but even so, there are so many ways to deal with Killjoy Ultimate right now, I don't really see this as being much of a problem. Moving on to our second A tier agent though, Cypher is going to be placed slightly higher than Killjoy this time around, after them reducing the cost of his ultimate a few patches ago. You can throw that thing out pretty much whenever you want, and although these changes with having his utility destroyed does still affect him, it doesn't seem like it's nearly as big of a deal as it is for Killjoy, since it's unlikely Sovas or Brimstones are going to aim their ultimates at Cypher's setups, at the very least in matchmaking. Cypher's win rate in matchmaking is not great, but he's still seeing a fair amount of play in pro play, and we expect him to be pretty good on the new map, considering how many areas they have to worry about from the attackers. For both Cypher and Killjoy, their main gig is holding down territory and providing their team with info, and on a map this wild, that'll certainly be helpful. Moving on to Astra though, she hasn't really received any changes this patch, and with Fracture's release, she really does have potential to be decent on this map due to the number of choke points, but there's also a number of different attack locations that does cause her to fear getting caught in her astral form just a little bit more. That being said, she does have the potential to have so many smokes throughout the round. Maybe this could be a map that she really has a lot of value on, being able to rotate all of her stars and all. She's still a very strong pick on all of the previous maps, seeing a fair amount of pro play as usual, and although her matchmaking win rate is a little bit low, that likely has to do with her difficulty level to play. Astra is a good agent, and learning her will definitely aid you, but she's by no means a must pick right now on really any map, and Omen is always an alternative. Speaking of Omen, he's up next on the list. These two agents are oftentimes included right next to each other for us, as Omen is basically just an easier version of Astra. Astra may bring a lot more utility to the table, but Omen is just so simple to play, and it's very hard to not get value out of his kit. No changes to him this patch, but he does seem to be getting a little bit of play on Fracture so far, so we do see this as being a good map for Omen mains out there. With a near 50% win rate, Omen is a solid pick for controller, especially if you're forced to fill for your team. He's simple to play, and he still sees a fair amount of pro play. We all know Omen's strengths though, and I don't feel like I need to go over it too much. Keep an eye on Omen for the new map. In pro play, he may get outclassed by other agents, but seeing as the map isn't nearly as big as the last 2 releases, I think you'll see Omen a bit more on this map. Moving on to our last agent in the A tier though, and that is going to be Raze. Raze is still pretty good, and although her boombot is seeing a slight change this patch where they're reducing the damage but also reducing the price, we still think Raze is a very strong pick in the current meta. She will likely be a pretty strong pick on Fracture due to her ability to gather info safely with her Roomba, as well as utilize her explosives in more close quarters combat on sites. Raze is in a good place right now. Her win rate was the 3rd highest for the last act, sitting at 51.3%, and she definitely saw a fair amount of pro play, so if you're worried about these Raze changes hurting her, I wouldn't worry about it too much. She's still going to be very strong in this patch. But now we're moving on to our S tier agents, and these are the best of the best currently in the game, and dare I say must picks on many of the maps. Jett is starting off the S tier, and as we mentioned earlier, she has a 50.2% win rate, which although isn't incredible, she also sees a very high pick rate, which generally will pull down the win rate just a little bit, as players who don't know how to play the agent will tend to lose a bit more. Jett sees a ton of pro play from pretty much every single team, and she's also just so versatile. She can op, she can rifle, she can use shotguns, she can use knives. Jett's just a really solid pick on any map, and pretty much in every team comp you'll see a Jett. Now, you can get by running another duelist if you'd like to, but Jett always seems to rise to the top, and her ability to do anything definitely sets her apart. There's not much else to be said, Jett's just good. The next agent on the list is going to be Viper. For the last act, Viper actually has the 2nd highest win rate, right below Brimstone, and she's pretty much a must pick on maps like Breeze and Icebox. She's very strong on maps like Bind and Split, and we're expecting her to be decent on the map Fracture as well. Viper being a must pick on maps like Breeze and Icebox already puts her pretty high on the list, but her being still strong on pretty much all maps, it's hard to make an argument that Viper isn't incredibly strong right now. We switched around some of the positions of these agents in the S tier due to some small critiques, but Viper is definitely one of the best agents in the game right now, and we recommend picking her up. Moving over to Sage, still thriving in the meta, she's pretty great on all maps given her purpose is so applicable. She stalls pushes, and does a very good job of it. She'll probably be great on Fracture, just as she is on every other map. With the 4th highest win rate in the game, and in pro play she sees a bunch of play, the only thing worth really mentioning in terms of changes with her is her wall can now be destroyed by Brimstone ult and Sova ult and Breach Aftershock, but this likely won't be too much of a difference in the end. Although when I'm playing Breach now, you can bet I'm going to be using my Aftershock on her wall every time. Sage has been great and is going to continue to be great as time goes on. This takes us to our last agent in the S tier though, and that is going to be Skye. Skye is going to be super great on Fracture, being able to take space aggressively and scout for info with her birds. Especially on defense, since you'll likely be fighting for space quite a bit, Skye is going to be so nice to have. We all know the nightmares that are currently plaguing matchmaking with Skye, and she's only going to be more necessary with the addition of Fracture. She's the 5th highest win rate in the game, currently below Sage, and is seeing a ton of pro play. She's not going anywhere now, and if we see some changes in the future, maybe that will change, but today she's here to stay. This brings us to our final agent of the week though, and that is going to be Sova. Sova finds himself in our OP tier of the week. We place him slightly above Skye just because of his individual ability to do really something that no other agent in the game can with his wall hacks. And now he even destroys Sentinel utility with his ultimate pretty much on accident, which is going to be very frustrating to deal with. Sova is just so good and has always been so good. He'll be pretty good on Fracture for similar reasons that Skye is, not to mention lots of parts of the map are really easy to wallbang through. Sova is still definitely the king of Valorant and will remain as our top pick for this week. As we mentioned though, if you want to learn any of these agents and how to play them to the best of your abilities, be sure to check out all of the courses we have available on the website for each one. Link in the description below. Be sure to let us know how you think we did with the tier list, and we're excited to see how the Fracture meta plays out over time, or if the Breach changes maybe give him more of a place in the meta as well. As always, thank you all for watching. I hope this was helpful for you all to figure out what's currently strong in the game, and as always, my name is King, and we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.